afternoon, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. I'm so happy to have you join me once again this week, where we will still be focusing on some very important information with regards to paper 3, and particularly what you've been working with so far in the first term, which is your written tasks for um, your formal assessments. All right, so this lesson is brought to you by the Department of Education in collaboration with Sibona Discovery Center, and we're dealing with English home language, particularly this afternoon. Now, if you're looking at creative writing, I did focus on a lesson last week where we dealt with the essays. Now, this week we're going on to the next one, which the next part of writing as a skill, which is dealing with transactional writing. So we're going to be dealing with the following: the various types of transactional pieces that you need to be aware of when you're tackling this in paper 3 as well as in the formal assessments this year. And then we're going to look at how would you approach this if you're given it in the exam paper, any of the following genres that we're going to be speaking about. All right, so I'll give you some hints there, or a checklist on what you need to focus on when you are working with this. Now remember, grade 12s, you have to obviously follow the instructions in any paper that's given to you. Now, in paper 3, it's very clear what the examiner wants from you when they're setting the question. So you need to read the entire question to understand what's going on. But before we get into the questions, there will be a cover sheet that will tell you this is English paper 3, and it'll give you all of the marks allocated, that kind of thing. And then you turn over. And then you see a section like this, which is saying the paper compromises of two sections as follows. It will give you what section A is about, which is the essay we dealt with last week. And then this next part is the one where you'll have section B dealing with transactional writing, consisting again of 50 marks. Now here we are saying we want two pieces from you with a 25 mark allocation, and that word count needs to be between 180 to 200 words. Now, when you're looking at the sections, or when you're looking at doing a final piece of work for your transactional or your essay, there is a time guideline that we give to you. Now, if you want to make sure that you are going to be able to use your time adequately for the examinations, then start practicing now to ensure that when you're tackling, for example, section A, you are giving it the due time, which is 80 minutes. And then when you're dealing with your section B, you're giving yourself 35 minutes each for the two transactionals. Now, if you're going to spend too much of time on one of the sections, you're going to obviously then rush to the second section. So please pace yourself, ensure that you know what you want to say and how you're going to say it, dealing with the structures and the formats here. And then you're going to obviously look at the content, which will be dependent on the question given to you. Again, please, it's not a thing of going on the internet and copying down or by hearting a piece that you've read and regurgitating in the exam. We're not going to credit you for that because it's obviously not your own work. All right, so we want to see that it is your original ideas when you're answering the questions. Now, with transactional writing, we are dealing with the fact that you are communicating. Now, you know that when you want to say something, it's very clear in your head what you want to say, and then you work out how you're going to say it. Now, when you are looking at the written piece of work, again, you are communicating. But again, this time, you are dealing with writing down your ideas or writing down the information. Now, when a person then reads that information, they're going to decode, they're going to deconstruct what you're saying to make sense, to see if what you're saying actually makes sense, okay, in regards to the topic. And then obviously the end result is that the reader is going to read that, or your marker is going to read through it and mark or assess that piece of work. So remember, you're communicating your ideas in the written platform here. Okay, so what we're saying here is that these texts dealing with transactions are written for a purpose. So your purpose is to get an idea across in relation to the topic given to you, and we are therefore thinking in our heads that I would get a response to what I'm saying. Now, obviously in the exams, that's not going to happen, okay? the marker is not going to be able to give you a response immediately. So during your school time of interacting with transactions, you're going to have the opportunity to ask ma'am or sir, listen, I did this transaction and I got this mark. Tell me why I got that mark. Or when ma'am or sir is giving it back to you, the formal assessment task, they will review that with you. All right, depending on the time. So we are expecting a response. Now, in real life, it means it's a transaction. So when you are dealing with people in the real world, you're writing a letter to somebody, or you are complaining about something, or you're applying for something, you are partaking in a transaction. And therefore, you would require a response to that. Okay. So therefore, grade 12s, we are saying to you, you need to take note of what you're saying. Again, we're going to look at ways in which to go about this. Would it be appropriate to say this or not say that? That kind of thing I'll come to just now. But when we are looking at the marking of the transactionals, we are dealing with the rubric. Okay, there's weightings and the rubric involved here would then have the weightings included. So we have a criteria and we have a mark allocation for each of those criteria. So the first criteria we're dealing with here is the content and planning. Now what that means is, did you go and follow the process of writing this piece out? The content that you put, in other words, all the information you put into this piece, was it linked to the question that was given to you? That is where the 60% allocated out of 100%, obviously, okay? The 60% here is then allocated to the content and planning. Now, if you fail to plan what you want to say, obviously you're going to fumble and not get the idea across. So this is where you need to take the time to focus on this, as this is the largest part in terms of the more marks allocated for this piece, okay? So 15 marks given to you here for evidence of the fact that you planned and you have given us content that is relevant to the question we have asked of you. Right? Then you have the next section, which is your language, style, and editing. Now, this is equally important. It is 10 marks, yes, but remember, here we are dealing now with the technical stuff. Did you take note of the language structures? Have you used language that's appropriate? Have you used sentences, various types of sentences? Did you make use of maybe a rhetorical question in this particular piece? Again, also, have you used those sentence constructions or those language conventions in the correct way in the text? All right? Your style. Have you stuck to a very formal way of writing or an informal way of writing? Now, that again is dependent on the question, and the content will have to match, okay? Now, if you're going to go looking at being very informal in your pieces, remember, that's not what we're testing here. It is a formal piece of writing, even though there's portions where it will be informal, all right? So you need to be aware of that also when you're writing. Then in the editing section of this rubric, we're looking at the fact of, did you now make sure that your spelling is correct? When you used a word, was it used appropriately in that sentence? There's no use in saying something just to sound like you know a word, or you have used a bigger a word that would be accessible to maybe a graduate, and you don't understand what that word means. So please be aware that you're using vocabulary that is appropriate to the audience that's going to read this, as well as the fact that you know that that word is making sense in the context, okay? So you'll make use of your homonyms, your homophones, your antonyms, your synonyms, all those various parts of speeches, okay? You'll look at maybe figurative language as well that you could use, and hyperbole, where you over exaggerating something just to make your point come out clearly. Those kind of things you would use, but then we're asking the question of, have you used those things appropriately when we're giving you that mark of out of 10, which is that 40% that we're looking at there. All right, and that total then giving us 25 marks. 25 times 2 giving us 50 for section B. Now, grade 12s, with anything in life, there will be a grouping of sort of similar um, text and or similar information that we're looking for in a particular piece. Now, this is where we talk about categories. Now, when we're looking at transactionals, there are basically four categories that you would have done from the time you were in grade 8. And hopefully by the time you're now in grade 12, you have covered the majority, if not all, of these categories. Now, when we're looking at category A, we're saying in that genre, we're having your friendly letters and your formal letters. And that is where all the types of letters come into play. So a letter of request, a letter for an application, for a vacancy perhaps, all right? Or an opportunity to, to showcase something. A business letter there, very formal in its structure as well. Now, the next one would be the letter of complaint, which you should be very familiar with because many of us like to complain in the world. So that letter there comes out when we're dealing with the letter of complaint. Then we've got a letter of sympathy or sharing condolences. Maybe somebody has gone through a tragic experience and you want to share your condolences or provide sympathy to those people. Then you have a letter of congratulation. Maybe someone's achieved an excellent result or done something very well. You want to now congratulate them on those things, or maybe the birth of a baby, that kind of thing, okay? And then further on to that, we got the informal letter or the formal letter to the press. Now, that is a very important one because when you're writing to the editor, remember the editor cannot do much, but they can obviously get what you are saying, and then maybe obviously um, publish it, and then obviously the people who need to then work with that information would provide a response. So there again, we'll look at what is important about the letter to the press. Then in category B, we're dealing with now you as a grade 12. You're going to go out there and you're going to apply for a job if you do not go to tertiary education institutes immediately. So maybe you're thinking, I'm going to go and work first and then study later. That's also a possibility. So this is where the curriculum vitae comes into play and the covering letter. Because if you're going to send in your CV, there has to be an attachment or a letter attached there that is a brief background synopsis of you as a person, who you are, where you come from, what you've achieved, that kind of thing. All right. And there we're asking this question in a combination of both the CV and the covering letter. And then basically we have the obituary here, which is again a very important one because this is where we need to establish the difference between the eulogy and the obituary. And I'll cover that as well in this lesson. Right? And then section C, we're dealing with, or category C, sorry, we're dealing with your formal or your informal reports here. And there you are reporting on maybe a scenario that's taken place or an accident has taken place, and you are going to provide a report. All right. Or you went out and you were part of a group that went to a convention and you're now reporting on those things. These are the things we would be looking at in the report. Right. Then you got the review. Now we have not focused so much on film reviews that we've done in the formal assessments over the years. But you would know that if you watched a movie and you have loved this movie and you decided that you want to now tell your friend about it, then you would be doing a review of that, okay? Similarly, if you went to a restaurant or you went to a different hall, for example, you want to now provide a review of that, then you would be doing the review there as well. All right, and then you've got the newspaper article or a magazine article in this instance as well, where you will deal with the difference here in terms of the target audience. Who are you targeting when you're dealing with the magazine article as opposed to who is the target audience when dealing with the newspaper? And obviously, it's more formal and sometimes not so formal when we're dealing with the magazines, right? Then we've got the next one, which is the agenda and the minutes. Now, why I say and the minutes? Because they are, again, we are questioning this one with the combination, Right. So you are going to say, I'm going to now talk to so and so about a situation, and you want to sort of get evidence that you had this conversation. This is where we would call it a meeting. You're having a meeting between the two of you, and you're recording um, the conversation that took place, all right, or the ideas that were shared there. Now, then you would send out a formal agenda to say, we're going to be having this sit down at this venue, and we're going to be talking about the situations. Right, that would go out prior to the minutes being completed. And then we've got category D, which is basically then the one there dealing with the formal speech or the informal speech. And now, why I say formal or informal? Again, because your target audience here or the question will dictate who is the target audience in this instance. Now, if it's an informal speech that you just, very casually talking at a birthday party, for example, then that would be a different way of talking at an assembly or a convention speech that you may need to come up with. Right. Then we've got the dialogue and the written interview. Now, there again, there'll be a slight difference between the two, but I will cover that in the lesson. So when we are looking at these four categories, grade 12, we have to ensure as examiners or as a teacher that we are going to assess you on all of these categories. So you will see either of these ones um, in the papers that you're going to be working with or in the task you are going to be working with. All right, remember in paper 3 or even on the task, you're getting at least about 4 or 5 topics that you have to choose from to write on. All right, so we will definitely want you to go through and look at that. Now, I did speak about communicating and writing down what you want to say in this instance. Now, this is where, again, the writing process becomes crucial, and hopefully you have mastered this process by now. If you haven't, then there's a quick diagram there for you to go back and look at. And remember that whenever you are doing any kind of writing, you need to work through this process, because then it gives you a substantial plan that you're working with to produce a almost error-free piece of work that's targeting the right audience, that's addressing the necessary content that is required of you, and that is making it interesting where your audience is latched on to what you're saying and providing is able to then provide good feedback to you in terms of an assessment mark for this. All right. So please plan firstly, brainstorm the ideas. Then from there, you're drafting a piece of work. You want to make sure that whatever you want to say is done on a key, with key points on a mind map, for example. Then we're going to the next part where we're going to revise that. You're going to check, does it make sense? You get the opportunity here to say, I don't like this idea, or I like this idea. Maybe I must expand on this. So that's where you will revise. And then when you're editing that piece of work, you are checking again for the fact that you've used language correctly, you've used the right spelling of words, you have made sure that you've used a correct synonym, for example, that is still saying what you want to say in that instance, or you've used, again, correct phrases or clauses if you're going to use that in your particular piece of work. And then have you then constructed your sentences correctly is where you're going to check in the editing process. And then finally, you're going to the publishing section, which is where you're going to then produce that final piece of work, hand it in, and it'll be assessed by your educator. Right, so let's go into the various genres now. So when we're looking at the first one, we are talking about the formal letters. Now, the formal letters are there and they have various requirements. So you as the writer need to ensure that you are focusing on the following. When you are dealing with the letter, you got to understand there's a purpose behind this. So you're either going to apply for the job or you're going to give your views on a certain issue to the editor in that instance, all right? Because maybe he or she published something and you didn't like that idea, so you will air your views. Or you're going to maybe complain about an experience or a service that was not delivered correctly when you went into a store or interacted with a person. You get to write the letter of complaint. Then also maybe you want to request further information on something that you came across. So you do have a letter that you can write here as well, right? Or even I did say to you at the beginning, you want to express your sympathy or your condolences to a person who has maybe experienced some kind of tragedy, right? So the next part after the purpose is to consider the audience. Who am I writing this piece of work for? Now we can say very blanket here that I'm writing it for the marker, but that's not what I'm asking you to look at. I'm saying to you, who is the person that in the real life scenario would be receiving this letter? Okay, and that is the person that you need to take note of when you are writing the piece of work, right? So you are writing to a person you may know or you may not know personally, and or who you know in a more formal way, for example, like your educator, right? So there would be three ideas that you can look at when you're working with the audience. Therefore, if you are writing it as a formal letter, your language needs to be formal. So you would not include certain um, ways of talking or writing down information. You'll always be polite. You're not going to use vulgar language. You're not going to be overtly, rude in this piece of work. You want to get your point across in the most polite manner. Your tone again is very much formal. So further to that, we're looking at the format. Now, we haven't been as strict in terms of format in that you need to know that this is the only format that is there, because there are variations. But the basic format needs to be there. And the basic format is the fact that you must have an address that this letter is going to, and the date on which this letter has been written, right? There has to be a person who is receiving this letter, and that person will have an address, a formal postal address that this letter will be sent to. Then the next thing is you obviously going to greet that person. So you're going to do it in the formal way. For example, like dear Mr. Makoe or Makobe, or you're going to say sir or madam. Now, there again, your teacher will guide you on the most appropriate salutation to use there. That's it. That's formal. Please don't say, hey, how's it? Okay, to the person. Hey, Vash, or hey, whoever, and then think it's all right. Formal piece of work. Include the topic line underneath that salutation, and thereafter you're going to obviously include your paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and your formal conclusion at the end there would have to then be written in the last paragraph, and you'll end with the salutation saying yours faithfully. All right. Now, if the letter was started with the name of the person, let's say you said, Dear Vash Suchit, for example, then the letter may end with yours sincerely. In other words, you know Vash as a person, and therefore you are writing to that person that you know, that formal piece of work. But if you didn't know Vash and you just wrote so, madam, and Vash is reading it, then it would be acceptable to use that yours faithfully. All right. So the last part then will be the signature and the name of the sender. Underneath the signature is the name of the sender that you will be including. Now, when we're looking at the content, please, please, please remember content is driven by the question. Okay, so the question that is set is going to dictate the content that is going to be in this piece of work, right? So the next thing we need to work on here is the fact that you are going to take that question and you're then going to plan your opening paragraph. Now, the opening paragraph is the introduction, and that's where you need to grab the attention of the reader. All right? He or she needs to be well informed immediately that I am going to be discussing this issue. Grab their attention, and then the central point has to be mentioned there, and your next paragraph and your third paragraph will then be around that idea. So your points need to be organized on what you want to say. And you need to then take note of when you're arguing or putting your point across, it needs to be done in a logical way. You can't talk about X and then go talk about A. They, it's two different areas altogether. There's a logical flow, you follow the sequence of that. All right. So if your points are making sense in a logical way, it will strengthen your view, or it will strengthen the argument that you are putting forth in this particular piece. Please always be concise and get to the point. Don't ramble on just to make sure that you're covering 200 words. If you can say the same information in 180 words, then that's also fine. But don't also go and write 100 words and there's nothing there about what is relevant. All right? So plan accordingly, please. Further on, we're looking at the register. In other words, have you understood that there has to be a degree of formality in this piece of work, right? So how much of a formal degree must be there or how less will be dictated again by the question that has been asked. There must be the fact that this piece of work is applicable to the audience and the purpose that has been asked of you. The letter should be clear and straightforward. It must be concise and to the point, and there has to be logic to it. All right? You can't just talk about totally strange things and expect to get a mark. When you're looking at the style here, grade 12, with the formal letters, we are saying, please look at the choice of words you are working with. You're going to choose certain words to use. So please make sure those words are appropriate. They fit the context that you are speaking about. You're looking at your sentence structure. Maybe you used a simple sentence and you moved on to the more compound and the complex ones, right? That's fine. You can use that. You use a variation of sentences, but are they actually having what they need to? For example, where the coordinating conjunction comes in, or whatever other linking words need to be there, have they been included? And then was your tone appropriate when you wrote this piece of work? Again, direct, simple English, please, because that is where you will get your point across. If you're going to complicate it with words that you don't understand, then obviously you're going to confuse yourself and you're going to confuse the reader as well. To say, hold on, I don't think this candidate knows what he wants to say or she wants to say. So keep it simple and ensure that the English that you're using makes sense to the reader. Please avoid the use of slang or colloquial language. Again, candidates, remember that we say there is a degree of informalness here, but it has to always lean on the majority side to the formal side. All right? So avoid slang, avoid colloquial language in totality if you can. Avoid the use of contractions, because sometimes you just go and put an apostrophe there to make a contraction on your own accord, and it actually isn't a valid contraction. All right? So be aware of those things. Abbreviation and acronyms, there is a time and a place to use those, but please don't use that in the formal setup of the letters here, right? Also, when we're dealing again with the formal letters, let's say you're going to air your view on an issue that was published by the editor, right? You now need to make sure that when you're responding to that editor, that you do not provide false information. So you research the point that you want to say before you actually write it. Now, obviously, in the exam setup, if you're going to do this kind of letter, you need to be, again, sure that you know what you're talking about. Don't write about something that you have no idea about. Rather go for the option that you know stuff about. You have information about it. You're aware or have background knowledge of those things. All right. And a topic will not just be, or the topics in the exams or in the formal tasks will not be topics that you have never heard about. It will be topics relevant to you as a young individual in the world. It might be dealing with concepts that you have dealt with maybe already 2 years ago. And it will probably deal with concepts that you're going to come across in the next 2 or 3 years. Those are the kind of things you need to look at when you're preparing for this, all right? Please avoid accusations that have no substance to it. Don't make a threat, because obviously, can you carry out the threat in the exam? Not the case, okay? And that will not be able to be actually awarded marks as well, okay? Emotional language, steer away from that. Sarcasm, cliches, all those things, rather not included. Try and be original as far as possible. That's what we want from you, originality and simple words that get your message across. If you're that candidate who's struggling, yes, that's the best way to go. But if you're the candidate who wants to get more marks and is, very fluent in the language, you've got a good vocabulary base, all those things, then you obviously would then go to the higher level of understanding or the higher way of writing, where you'd put in more of these things I've been speaking about so far. All right. So the next part that I need to also make sure that you know about is the fact that when you're using your modal verbs, such as would, could, and should, that's very relevant with the formal letters, all right? Because it's saying we should do that. You could do this. It would be of great help if this happens. Again, being formal and almost bringing the reader into your space when you're trying to get your view across. More formal phrases and expressions. Example, I would be grateful if you could send me instead of please send me, right? Those kind of things would then obviously move you from a very much, let's say, just an adequate level to more on the top levels, all right? Where a substantial or a moderate level starts to come into play here. So again, that's dictated by the rubric where we're looking at the categories there, okay? Or the criteria there. Now, with the formal letters, you have to check. When you're completing a letter of complaint, for example, right? Or even the letter to the editor or a business letter, whatever it is. Do I have a sender's address? Do I have the date of the letter included? That's beneath, obviously, the address of the first person. Thirdly, do I have the intended recipient's address? Have I then included my salutations correctly? That's the one where I spoke to you about dear or sir or madam, right? Underneath the salutation, did I include that line where I said what I'm talking about here, the main idea? And then paragraph 1. Have I included in paragraph 1 the reason for my letter, right? Because that's introducing the letter or the response. Then in the second paragraph, did I possibly talk about causes or consequences due to the issue, all right? Have I shared views that are appropriate in terms of what was published? Maybe I disagreed with that viewpoint or agreed with that viewpoint, then that idea in paragraph 2 must come through, right? Telling the person or the editor why you disagreed with that view, or why you didn't, why you agreed with that view, and how you think it could be beneficial for other people. And then finally, paragraph 3, we're looking at the possible resolution to the issue. Again, you could say, okay, based on what I've said up above, I think that maybe we could look at these things as being possible solutions to the issue. That kind of thing should be included in paragraph 3. And then the final part there would then be your salutation again, where you are saying yours faithfully or yours sincerely, and then signing off with your signature and your full name. Right. So remember, if it's in the exams, we don't want to know your full name, all right, or your surname, because that is not appropriate. So you will obviously use an alias for that. Right. Now, there's a little diagram again there for you, which you would look at. Please always remember that the question will dictate the content. So match it and make sure it is there making sense, right? The content. And here's the structure of the formal letter that we're looking at and the informal. You will recall I said to you that, oops, let's go back here. So I can take out that. Yeah. So, okay, so let's look here. There is your sender's information, the date, and there's the recipient's information, dear, and then it carries on. All right. So that's quite a good diagram to refer to if you want to just quickly remember what are the requirements of the formal or the informal letter. Right. Now we go to the next genre, which is the speech. Now, with regards to the speech, it is the written account. So when you are in class and ma'am says, today we're dealing with orals and you're going to prepare a speech and all those things, that is a different section altogether. That is you speaking or presenting your speech, okay? Now we're dealing with the written piece. So we would then say to you, you're going to take what you would orally say and write it down for us. So again, there'll be a specific purpose for this particular speech, and the topic again will guide you on this. When you're writing this speech, grade 12s, please think carefully how you're going to start the speech, all right? Because it's not the fact that you will gauge the audience while you're standing in front of them. That's not how you would be thinking about this. Because now you're going to think, okay, I'm writing down my speech. So I'm thinking of the kind of audience that will read the speech, all right, or hear the speech. So in that case, so look at again the style to use here. Am I going to be starting my speech in a humorous fashion? Or am I going to be serious about the content I'm talking about? And again, when you realize which audience you are targeting here, that is where that idea would come in. Do I want to make them laugh a bit before I get into the seriousness of the issue? Or do I just start with the seriousness and continue like that? So again, your audience would be relevant here. And then the purpose of the occasion. So are you there as an RCL rep, for example, or are you going to write a speech for the minister to talk about an issue? That kind of thing, you know, it's very relevant, and you need to obviously take note of that. So your purpose is very important. Now, the sign of a good speech is the fact of the matter that you can capture the attention of the audience. And can you hold their attention, right? So you don't want a situation where someone's reading something and they're thinking to themselves, oh, but I've heard this before, or it doesn't make, it's not like it's something different for me to look at. So that is what you want to be careful about. Make sure that it inspires the reader to continue reading that speech. Paragraph form has to be included. Remember, it comes into play here when dealing with the structure. You can't start with the sentence and continue the whole thing through as one long sentence and finish at the word count 200 and say, I'm done with the speech. No, you've got to look at the fact that you're breaking down your ideas into paragraphs and you're providing evidence. Now, you will recall previously we spoke about the Peel formula. Remember, you're making your point, you're going to then explain your point of view, you'll substantiate it with evidence as to why that point of view is correct or not, and then you're going to link that idea that you're talking about to the previous one, for example, or to the topic that is given to you. So go over that Peel structure again. Also go over the fact that you have the 5 W's and the H, all right? Who you're writing for, where is the scenario taking place, Why are you writing this? What do you want to say? Right? When um, will be considered here. When are you going to be delivering this speech, for example? All right. And then finally, the H is how are you going to deliver it? Obviously, that will dictate again. Is it going to be a formal speech or an informal speech, formal review or an informal review? So that kind of things you need to please go back and revise. Right. The tone again on the speech here has to be formal, or depending on a question, it can be informal. And that again would come through when you're looking at the question that's asked of you. Your opening or your greeting, please always keep it simple and brief. Outline the subject of your speech already in the first paragraph, please, and then continue from there. Right? Please always include at least 3 to 4 different ideas on the topic, because it then makes for a good read. If you're going to talk about one issue throughout, then the audience is going to be like, oh, I'm so tired of this. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to read it anymore. So don't fall into that category. Think about 2 or 3 different ways of putting your ideas across. And that's where, again, that writing process comes into play. Right? And then finally, in the conclusion, please don't leave the speech hanging in the air. Ensure you have an appropriate conclusion to that speech. Right. So, did you take note of your audience? Did you ensure that your style is also either formal, humorous, or serious? Did you note the purpose of why you're writing the speech? The occasion at which you're going to present the speech, for example, would be important here. Did you take note that you've made a use of paragraph formation? Did you talk about maybe 4 or 5 different aspects in the speech? And did you ensure that there was a logical flow of one idea to the next idea and a proper conclusion given there? All right. Now, remember, also crucial is the language. Was it appropriately used or not in the setup? Then we go into the dialogue or the interview. Now, the variation in this is very simple, great class, but I'll cover it quickly as I'm going through. The dialogue, you must know by now, is a conversation between 2 or more people, right? But we try and stick to 2 people when dealing with the dialogue, all right? Just for easier assessment purposes. But it can be between more than two people. But the exchange is of words is as if it's right now in this setup, like you and I are having a conversation right now. So it is happening in the present moment, the present tense. It's directly the words that have been spoken between the 2 people. The interview is similar to this. The only difference here is the fact that there's someone who is asking questions, probing a response from the next person. All right. So that is the crucial difference between the dialogue and the interview. Now, when you're looking at the dialogue and the interview, this is something you need to take note of. In the conversation, 2 or more people are equally participating. There's no need to give one speaker more talk time than the other. Okay, then it's not needed then. Rather, just have 2 of them that are having equal talk time in your piece. Right. Then you have basically the interview, where there are again maybe 2 or more. So there will be a panel that is being interviewed by somebody, and that person's going to ask questions of each of the panelists. So that also takes place, right? Now there, you're going to get the information and you're going to record it as it is also said by the person. So again, that is the difference. Now the dialogue has to be spontaneous. It has to be natural. It must flow as if the conversation is taking place right now. So you have to place yourself in the position of 2 imaginary persons. So if you're thinking of maybe Bingo and having a conversation, for example, right? That kind of scenario. Think about the characters that are involved here, maybe they're two different characteristics altogether that you want to showcase and have a spontaneous conversation between these two people, all right, or two characters. Then your opinions and your views must come across um, some easier there. Right. Oops, I moved this slideshow too quickly. Let's go back. Mm, okay. Right. So let's move on then with the dialogue and the interview. Remember to keep it brief and simple. Get to the point as quick as possible. It doesn't need to go on the dialogue on and on and on, because then it becomes really difficult for the reader to follow. And you don't want to also put a situation where there's so many people in the dialogue here that there's difficulty to ascertain, is it Vash talking, or Lorato, or Bongani, or Simpiwe? All of those things, you don't want that. Keep it at least to the two people that are speaking to each other. Avoid the small talk, capture only the important information, and give your characters um, that characteristic that they have as a person, that unique one that makes them that important character, like SpongeBob or Bingo, as I mentioned to you. It makes them stand out because they have a particular personality trait that you want to showcase with the dialogue, okay? So your word choice is very important there as well. Be consistent, all right? Keep it as true as possible to the character you may be talking about here. Create suspense, keep us thinking, wanting more from you. And if you need to, in the formal task, not in the final exam or in the exam setup, you can read your dialogue out aloud to yourself to see if it makes sense. All right, but in your time of revising or reviewing, you're going to now read it in your quiet time and see that it makes sense. Right. Then, with the dialogue and the interview checklist, have you included names of characters on the left side of the page? Okay, the colon is appearing after the name of the character, because remember, now you're going to say, here starts the direct words that the interviewer or the interviewee or the people that are in this dialogue, the conversation taking place, it starts here, right? So the new line would start, you start your sentences on the next line, because then that would then show a new idea being spoken and a new speaker that is also coming into play. So advice to characters or readers on how to speak or present the action must be given in brackets. Now that would only come into play when you're dealing with the dialogue. Maybe you want to include, you know, some scenario or something, but I would say to you, be very careful with that, okay? Because if you're going to spend a lot of words on the scenario and then the dialogue doesn't come out too clearly, the conversation, then you're not really getting the most appropriate mark. So keep it, again, very short if you need to use that setup. All right, and the scenario must be sketched before you start writing. So here's an example, but again, you can see it's got more than two characters, right? Because here's students, Benny, Dayu, Lisa, and Udain. So that is different characters, all right? But you would try again to only use two, please. So maybe ma'am and you are having a conversation in class and you're recording that conversation, right? And then notice the colon then separating the idea that the person's speaking about. And then there's your checklist again given to you there. Please go back and review. Then, when coming to the next genre, the review, remember I said it can be an informal or a formal review. This is an individual's response to a work of either film, an art that you went and saw, an art piece that you went and saw at the gallery. Maybe you had a book that you read, or you had visited someone on an occasion that they were celebrating an event, and you are going to review those things now. So it is your individual response. So you need to obviously ensure, did you include the title of the book or the movie that you were reviewing here? Did you look at the fact that maybe there's an author involved, or a director involved, or a publisher, or a producer involved? Did you include that information? All right. Did you also um, have a discussion on a brief setting in which this book is taking place, or where this movie is set? Okay. And then did you include the characters that are maybe showcased in the novel, or showcased in the movie that you are reviewing, right? Did you look at the employment of stylistic effects to make this a little more of an interesting read for the audience? And maybe while you're reading the book or you watch the movie, there's various stylistic effects also used in those in that setup. All right. The style of writing or the genre that has been read by yourself here, you would speak a bit about that. All right. The style of how this author wrote this piece of work. And then you would provide a judgment or a recommendation. Now, don't be too harsh, because you are not the person that, is the unless you're the expert on this and not information, and you read a book and you're now providing a critique of it, then that's different, all right? But if you're just somebody who, an ordinary person reading the novel, and you have to provide a review, then your advice or your recommendation would be to that effect. You can't go and provide a harsh judgment when you don't really know the entire background or the setup as to why this novelist wrote this book, all right, or why this movie was produced. So look at that, please. Provide your judgment and your recommendation in the appropriate fashion. Right. The format of the review, remember, must have an introduction. So you're providing a brief background. You can say it's the third installment of the movie or the book. The body, again, 2 or 3 paragraphs would have key incidents that you're going to talk about that happen in the movie or in the book. Again, don't give us a plot summary here. We don't want that. You're just going to pick out important incidents that would make us want to go and read that book, okay? Because when you're reviewing something, it means that you're either going to give us a positive review or a negative review. So if it's a positive review, you're going to showcase 2 or 3 ideas that was good in the book or was good in the movie that would make the person go and watch or read that book. In the same instance, maybe if a person went to a restaurant and had to review a restaurant, for example, there could be good things on the items on the menu that you would like to showcase to the audience. That would come in your body. And then in the conclusion, you're going to ensure that you give your opinion that is relevant and is appropriate and is not outright nasty, okay? So give an opinion and a recommendation that is obviously appropriate. Your style and your tone here, again, remember, very formal again. Even though there might be some kind of informality, we're saying steer away from that and keep it formal as far as possible. You're going to be subjective here, so be aware of that, all right? And that's, again, a checklist there for you to look at when you are looking at the review. Thereafter, we go into the magazine article, and we're saying to you, the magazine article or the newspaper article is written to basically inform somebody about something, persuade an audience, or entertain that audience. Right, and therefore 3 different things can be done with this article, and therefore the style, the tone, the audience will be different, and you need to take note of that. So you need to look at, is my style appropriate? Is my tone appropriate for a setup where in a magazine the target audience could be youth, it could be middle-aged women, it could be a formal magazine article that needs to go to maybe the an example of maybe your gardening books that you gardening magazines that may be published, then that would be a different audience, all right? So you would be looking at that. the various ways of writing. If you're looking at the newspaper article, definitely more formal in its approach, and then your language should be appropriate to that instance. If you're looking at the school magazine, there obviously your target audience is your teachers, or maybe your majority would be your learners here, right? Again, sharing information with the learners in your age category, or maybe a year or two older than you or younger than you, and then that will be dictated again by the question that's given to you. So very important when looking at this, all right? There's three ways that you can deal with this article. When you are called to write a newspaper article or a magazine article, you as the reporter needs to state the facts, but keep it brief. Don't elaborate to such an extent where you've used more words that you have to, but more importantly, you've actually made you've just made us know every single detail which may not be relevant. So streamline it, bring it down to relevant stuff that needs to be incorporated. But please be accurate in the response. All right, please not long-winded, keep out the unnecessary information, communicate effectively with the reader throughout this piece. Attractive and interesting, definitely your heading must be like that, right? Keep it lively, be neutral in your response, okay? You don't want to take sides and give us very much a subjective viewpoint, all right? Have you looked at including names, places, times, positions? All of that information must be included, and it must be accurate, please. All right. Please also divide your ideas into clear paragraphs, like with every piece of work, and ensure that your article is stimulating the audience to read further. They must be absorbed in the information that's given to them. They don't want to now just read the first 5 lines and say, oh, this is boring, and put it down. Okay, so you want to look at that. Now, here's an example. A group of ex-convicts and former gang leaders started a youth development program in your community. The success of this program deserves praise. Now, you'll see there's highlighted information there. Ex-convicts, gang leaders starting what? A youth development program, and it now deserves some praise. So, write an article to be published in a magazine in which you highlight the successes of the project and convince the readers that a similar project should be initiated in other communities. So here is the statement on the top. The statement, and then this is the question that you need to answer. All right. So let's go look at how you could possibly break this down. Write an article. In other words, you need to establish where is this article going to be published. Is it a youth magazine? Is it a magazine only for the ex-convicts or for the criminals in jail? That kind of thing. All right? In which what must you do? Highlight. In other words, you must give us important information that would keep us engaged here. Highlight what? The successes of the project. So again, what must be highlighted, where, and again, what must you do? So what must you highlight? The success of the project, and why? There should be similar ones. Because you want to essentially convince the readers that we need to have more of these things, all right, or similar projects. And therefore, we want to say that is the part there of what must you do, all right? So it's important to establish the purpose and answer those questions. Okay, have you included your headline, your byline? Did you include important information like the writer, the date, the place? Did you use columns, for example? All right, when you are writing this out in the formal setup, a formal register, did you use that? And did you make use of paragraphs? Okay, then we come to the obituary. Now, remember, the obituary is the notice of the person who has passed away. So there's a target audience, all right? So you are now showcasing to them that you are formally announcing the passing on of somebody. You're going to have to include the cause of that person's passing on, as well as the funeral arrangements going forward from there. This is written in the third person because remember, you can't write your own obituary because you are still alive, right? So someone would be announcing your, uh, announcing the passing on of a person, okay, in this instance. So third person. The eulogy is the speech that's done at the funeral about the person who has passed on. So there's the variation here. Be careful that you do not do the wrong, you do not do the opposite of what's required. All right. So the aspects that you must look at including is the full name of the person who's passed on, his or her date of birth, and the time of date of death, sorry, and date of birth, right? Then including there is where the person might have been living at the time when they passed on. Possibly, if you know their birthplace, you can include that. You can also include, or you must include, sorry, the key survivors, like the husband or the wife or the children, all right, and the mother and father. Don't go further than that because then it becomes inclusive of every 45th cousin included as well. So let's not do that and keep it again to the small unit of people. Time, date, and the place of the funeral. That's all the arrangements must be mentioned there. And then a little tribute. When I say little, I mean, 2 or 3 sentences on a tribute to the person who's passed on. If you focus too much on the tribute, you're going to be obviously going towards the eulogy. So be careful. You may also include the cause of death. You may look at biographical information like, of him or her. The style and tone, be careful again here. It must be formal. It is a formal piece or a formal announcement. It has to be concise and to the point, and try not to use um, anything else except the euphemisms. All right. So there's the kind of structure we're looking at. And I'm sure you've seen this before, and you will be seeing it further when you are going to do some research on this, right? Again, the template will be given to you by your educator, and she or he will take you through it and make sure that you also include these or this information in your obituary when you are writing it out. And then here's the second part of the obituary included there in terms of the format. Talk about where the person was born, attended which school or graduated where, some employment information, for example. Are they possibly a member of, an important member of the community, church, or involved in activities? All those things you talk about there, right? And then the survivors of that are left behind, the key survivors must be included here. And then the last part is the funeral arrangements. All right. Again, match the content with the question that is given to you. And then you can read this in your own time as well of what needs to be included. Right. Then the email. One that is becoming a little bit more popular in terms of being assessed on. So, and also many people are using emails now to communicate quickly as opposed to waiting for the time where a letter gets posted to the post from the post office to somebody through postnet. All those things takes time. So if you want an immediate response or you would then send an email and the person would respond usually within a day or two, right? So the email is an electronic communication sent from one device to another with the support of an internet connection. Therefore, before completing the following activity, you need to obviously look at, did ma'am or sir use this, teach you this in the previous grades? If they didn't, then obviously they've done it in the first term with you this term before they've given you the information. So it's usually automatically loaded on your laptop and email address. But if it's now where you're writing it out, you would say, let's say larato.bongani@gmail or at yahoo.com, and that would be the address. All right. And then here's the format that would be included on a computer screen. So again, you'd have from who to who, CC, and to, which I'll take you through just now. Right. So from is obviously going to be from you, your contact, your email address. To will be the person's email you're going to be sending it to. Then the CC is the carbon copy. In other words, it can be optional, but it is including a copy of the email to somebody else. So for example, let's say you are sending your email to Vash. Now you want someone else to know that you have sent that email to Vash. So you would put the other person's email address in the CC column. All right. And then that would, when the email is then sent, it will send it to Vash and to the second person. If you want to go even further and you don't want Vash to know that you've sent a copy of this email to somebody else, it would then be the BCC. So it's an invisible contact. So let's say, for example, you're complaining about something that somebody did, and you're informing that person that you are very upset and all those things, and you go on, and you want the third person to know about it, but you don't want the second person to know that you're telling somebody else about it. So in that case, you would do the BCC. Right. And then the date would come up automatically on the email, and obviously it'll be the date on which you are writing the email. Then the subject is obviously required there. You need to tell us why this email is being sent. Clarify the message that is being sent, all right? Then in the opening paragraph, you would again say, dear whoever it is, or you'd say Vash or colleagues or whatever, and then and then you would continue to the next paragraph now, which is your introduction and your body, right? So in the body, you would then talk about the reason for the email. Why are you sending it out? What do you want the people to know about with this quick communication, right? And then that's 2 or 3 paragraphs there. And then you've got the closing, which is again optional. And then your signature will appear at the bottom of the email. So you can choose to do what we call include attachments on the computer setup, all right? But if you are now writing an email on the written piece of work, obviously you can't attach a file there, all right? But you could write at the bottom if you want to, attachment, whatever, right? So that is there for you to work with. And then that's another example there for you of what the email looks like. Again, we will only count the words from here onwards, this paragraph, all right? So you need to ensure that the words all the way to the last part of where you say, hope to see you there, must then be 180 to 200 words. Okay, that is where we would start marking from. Then there are many advantages to using the email, and that is, again, if it is the setup of not writing it out, okay? So you are now sending an email in the virtual space. Then that is basically how it would be beneficial for people to use emails. So again, it's a quick communication method, and it's going to get your message to the person almost immediately. And if they're checking their emails in 5 minutes, they would respond to you and you'd get a response. All right. But again, it's advantageous to do that, but also sometimes it's good to have the hard copy. Right. It's also got other advantages like a file attachment where you can include a lot more information attached to the email when you're sending it, and it's got it's environmentally friendly where you're not sending out pieces of paper. Good. So with regards to the transactional grade 12s, please, you got to continue to practice these pieces of work. Plan effectively and use your past year exam papers to work with. Please always choose a topic that appeals to you, yes, but more importantly, a topic that you have information on. Don't talk about something you have no idea about. Plan the response using your mind maps and your diagrams there to ensure that you have included relevant ideas. Keep your target audience in place or in mind constantly. Please always finish your transactional piece with an intriguing conclusion and the appropriate salutation that is there. Check the work, check the work, check the work before you submit. There's no harm in spending a little time extra on checking these things so that you get the most appropriate mark. Right. Please always write from your own experience. Your way forward right now is to keep abreast with information in the news bulletins, as well as in social media that is appropriate again to a teenager, or content that's appropriate to a teenager or the person that's going to be in the real world in the next 2 or 3 years. All right. And then keep in contact, or up to date in terms of contact with what's happening in the country, right? That is always an advantage in your life. You'll be able to have more, uh, let's say, concrete conversations, and you learn a lot more about society so that you can function effectively there. So do take note of those things, right? The formats for the transactional pieces are still a problem that we're finding throughout when we're assessing this. So please go back and study all the formats. Make sure you know that when you're writing to an editor, this is how the address looks. If you're complaining to a company or a person of the company, like the HR manager, this is how the address should look. All right. My content, again, is it relevant? Am I ensured that I'm ensuring that I have put in the salutations, the signature where it's needed? All those things need to be taken note of, right? And always make sure you are crossing out the irrelevant stuff, edit your draft, and don't just submit two pieces that look identical without any work done. Don't make personal comments, or write down these comments to your markers. They're not going to be impressed by it, and they're definitely not going to give you extra marks for that. All right. So grade 12s, hopefully you're going to go back and master these skills on how to handle the transactionals, and that you will get the most appropriate mark for the formal assessment as well as the exam paper that you will write in the year. So I want to again wish you all the best for the next week. And until I catch you again for another lesson in English home language, please take care of your health, take care of your loved ones, and always remember to keep up to date with content that's relevant to you as a grade 12 learner, because that's where your assessments are going to come from. So thank you once again for attending this lesson this afternoon. And until I see you again, goodbye and take care.